On November 17, 1978, the remains of two teenagers, a male and a female, were found by a man cutting firewood near Lake of the Woods and Dead Indian Highway in Klamath County, Oregon. Horrified, the man called the police. The remains of a small dog were also found. At the crime scene, an autopsy revealed that both victims had been shot multiple times in the head with a .22 caliber gun. The female victim had been sexually assaulted. The teenagers were later identified as Kirk Leonard Wiseman, 19, and Cynthia Lynn Frayer, 17. Both victims did not reside in Klamath County and had no connection to the area, besides the hitchhiking sign which read, quote, K Falls. That was found at the crime scene. Crime scene evidence was collected, preserved, and stored in hopes that advancements and technology would be able to help find the killer. Police found a letter written by Cynthia, addressed to her parents at the crime scene. In the letter, she talked about her travel plans, as well as her hopes and dreams. Police believe the pair were hitchhiking through Washington State, in Oregon, along with their dog. They most likely had planned to go to Crater Lake, as it is a place that Cynthia had always wanted to visit. Police later determined the pair had stayed a night at a motel in Roseburg. They were then picked up by a person who claimed to have dropped them off at Grants Pass Restaurant. Over the years, police interviewed several suspects, but none were ever charged, and the case eventually grew cold and would stay that way for nearly 40 years. Then in 2018, investigators sent pieces of Cynthia's clothing and items found at the crime scene to the Oregon State Police Crime Lab in Bend. And in 2019, investigators found evidence of traces of unknown male DNA on Cynthia's clothing. The unknown male DNA was then entered into the CODA's database, but no matches could be found. Investigators then decided to utilize the expertise of Virginia-based forensic service Parabon Nanolabs. The unknown male DNA was entered into genealogy websites, and soon in the summer of 2021, they were able to find a potential match. Investigators then contacted the suspect's family, but learned that the suspect had died in 1996. His children agreed to provide a DNA sample, and it was later confirmed that the DNA found at the crime scene belonged to their father, Ray Whitson Jr. Whitson lived with his family in Klamath Falls from 1976 to 1982 and worked at a lumber mill. He was known to frequent the area where the two bodies were found, and his family members also confirmed that Whitson had owned a .22 caliber gun, similar to the one used in the murders. While the suspect's demise made it impossible to prosecute him for his heinous crimes, having some closure as to the identity of their loved one's killer may give some semblance of closure to two grieving families who waited more than 4 decades for answers. William Anker Lie was born on October 19, 1910, in the United States. He stayed in the U.S. until he was 5 years old, before his mother moved to Norway in 1916. He spent his childhood, teenage, and adult years in Oslo, previously known as Christiania. During his teenage years, he developed an interest in agriculture and later started his own wholesale business of fruits and vegetables. After William had a stroke in 1969, he became depressed and changed his behavior. He also started phasing out his business. On July 13, 1972, William and his wife, Raganine, were visiting relatives on Opson Farm in Ski. They were going to stay there for a few days to help the relatives with farm operations. That night, while the family was eating dinner, William got up from the table and left the farm. His wife asked him where he was going, but William did not reply. This would be the last time that William was seen alive. Later that night, when William had still not returned, his wife called her apartment home in Oslo, hoping that William had gone there. The phone rang for a bit before someone picked up the call. However, they did not say anything and remained quiet. until the wife asked if it was William. On the other end, William then said yes. His wife asked him when he would be returning to ski. William replied that he wasn't feeling well and was not in the condition to drive as he had just taken some pills. The call ended and his wife assumed that William would return. The next day, however, he never did. When William had still not returned after 2 days, his wife and his brother went to the Oslo apartment. However, William was nowhere to be seen. Strangely enough, his wife's clothing and paintings were carefully cut up and placed on the coffee table in the living room. William was reported missing. A search investigation was launched, and missing person flyers were distributed throughout the police stations in Norway. William's car, a white Vauxhall Cresta, with the license plate number of DIA 4027, was also missing. His wife told investigators that along with the car, camping equipment including folding tables, folding chairs, and a few other items that were kept in the garage were also missing. In the next few days, William's information was published in newspapers and media, but to no avail. 1 month later, an investigating officer was reading the newspaper when a report caught his eye. It mentioned that someone had found abandoned camping equipment near a lake in Lesbian. The investigator contacted the Lesbian police station, who sent him a list of all the items that were found near the lake. The list included a travel radio, a small outdoor table, a travel briefcase, camping chairs, a water jug, a yellow warning light, a coffee pot, a jar of strawberry jam with the handwritten words, Strawberry 1971 on it, and a cover for a propane stove. The travel radio still had a sticker on it from the electronic store it was purchased from in Oslo. The police contacted the store and they told them that they had sold the radio to one William Anker Lie. His wife was called in and she was able to identify most of the items, including the jam jar, which she had hand-labeled herself with the word Strawberry 1971. The police then interviewed the man who found the abandoned camping equipment and the items near the lake. He told police that he and his wife had been traveling to Vast, fed at around 10 or 11, and when they noticed a man sitting in his chair near the lake, they noticed that he had a camping table with a tablecloth and a thermos next to him. Later that evening, while returning back to their home and passing by the lake, they could not find the man anywhere. However, his camping equipment was still present. Finding the abandoned camping scene suspicious, they notified police in the next few days. Police would receive another tip from a business associate of Williams, who claimed to have seen him somewhere along the road between Hale Dawn and Lesbian. He said he'd been wearing a blue coat. William's family confirmed that William did have a blue coat that he kept in his car. He used to wear the coat if he needed to wash or polish his car. The police then extensively searched the area, but could not find any trace of William or his vehicle. The police, however, did not search the lake, stating that the car could not have ended up in the water as it was too shallow to hide a vehicle. With no leads, the search was soon stopped. In 1974, William was declared dead by a court, and the case grew cold. In 2019, rested Narja. A detective show in Norway began investigating the case. In autumn of 2021, they decided to check Lake Tutation, as that was the only place. During the earlier investigation, which had not been searched, a search of the lake was conducted using sonar and underwater drones. Soon an object was picked up by the sonar at around 10 meters under the water. The drone was then used to investigate, and on September 10, 2021, a car with the license plate number DA 14027 was located. Laying vertically with the front part down in the mud, in the seabed, they notified police, and the car was pulled out and examined. As the car was buried in the seabed in the front, the paint was preserved and stayed as it was. In 1972, the police found human remains inside the car. The remains were then sent for an autopsy and identification to Oslo University Hospital. A test later confirmed that the remains did belong to William Anker Lie. Investigating the car, police found several objects inside. The objects were well preserved, despite the car being underwater for almost half a century. The objects included a farewell letter, a signed letter of resignation, and a few other documents. Because the objects were wrapped in plastic, they stayed well preserved throughout the years. William's wife and his brother died without ever knowing what had happened to him. William's immediate family was contacted, and they wanted to bury his body in his hometown of Oslo. From the contents that were found, it is believed that William committed suicide. The case was finally closed after 49 years. Candice Lane Rogers was a 9-year-old girl, attending Holmes Elementary School, living with her mother in Spokane, Washington. On March 6, 1959, Candice was out, selling mints for her Campfire Girl Scout troop in the neighborhood when she suddenly vanished. Later that evening, when Candice did not return home, her mother reported her missing. A massive search ensued. Police officers, along with volunteers and family members, began to search in and around the neighborhood. Helicopters were also called in to search from above, and sadly during the search, one of the helicopters crashed, resulting in 3 casualties. 12 hours later, a police officer found 6 boxes of mints scattered near bridge. However, there was no sign of Candice. Police would receive more than 750 tips in the following days, but none of them panned out. Her case was covered in the media, and her mother appealed to anyone who could help them provide any information into her disappearance, but to no avail. Then 16 days later, 2 hunters found Candice's shoes while hunting groundhogs in the remote woods. They notified police and sued. A search of the area found the body of Candice. She was found 12 miles away from her home. She had been buried under a pile of pine needles, and her legs had been tied together at the ankles with parts of her own slip. An autopsy revealed that she had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death with a piece of her own slip. Over the years, several people confessed the murder of the child, but none of the confessions were credible. Alfred Graves and James Howard Barnett were considered suspects, but they committed suicide shortly after. The only prime suspect was Hugh Byron Morris. Morris was a convicted serial killer and had murdered 2 Spokane women in a killing spree between 1959 and 1961. In 1955, he was charged for attempted molestation of 2 8-year-old girls while they were selling Girl Scout cookies in Fairfield, California. He was admitted to Atascadero State Mental Hospital for therapy and released as, quote, cured in January of 1957, Morse admitting to killing 3 women, but denied that he had anything to do with Candice's murder. In 2001, investigators were able to retrieve an unknown male's DNA from Candice's clothing. A DNA test ruled Morse out as a suspect. Police interviewed multiple suspects over the last 6 decades, but none were ever charged. In 2020, the investigators reached out to a Texas-based company, Ortham Labs, who were able to build a DNA profile. The DNA profile was entered into genealogy databases, and investigators found 3 possible suspects. The suspects were all brothers but were already dead. Police learned that only one of the brothers, John Ray Hoff, had had children. The police then contacted Hoff's daughter, who agreed to provide a DNA sample. A DNA test revealed that it was 2.9 million times more likely that Hoff's daughter was a genealogical match to the DNA sample found at the crime scene. Police then exhumed Hoff's body, and a DNA test subsequently identified John Ray Hoff as the killer. John Ray Hoff was 20 years old in 1959 and was never a suspect in Candice's murder. Hoff was a troubled teenager, and at the age of 16, he ran away from a state boys training camp. Near Olympia, authorities captured Hoff and 3 other boys near Yakima. His troubles would continue even after he was married and had children. In 1970, Hoff committed suicide by shooting himself in the head. In an eerie coincidence, police learned that Candice and Hoff were both buried in the same cemetery. It was also discovered by investigators that Hoff's stepsister was Candice's, quote, big sister and her Girl Scout campfire group. Hoff's wife and daughter have since removed Hoff's body from the cemetery to provide Candice's family some privacy. The case was solved after 62 years, with little peace afforded to anybody involved.